San Antonio versus Rodriguez and the pursuit of equal education showed us time and time again the importance of education for all and the fight for inclusion of minorities in our need for equal education. As someone who's worked in education for the last 5 years, I've been able to personally see the politics that revolve around education. I have actually been fortunate enough to work in the school district that I grew up in. While I lived in a fairly nice area, my school district is considered low income. What I find ironic, though, is that if you live in a nice area, the schools tend to reflect that. But for those who didn't have the opportunity or who are living paycheck to paycheck and tend to live in cheaper housing, their schools reflect that as well. So the question is, how can we make education equal as well as making funding equal? First, I want to look at the initial creation of Texas school system and how funding began. Initially, in 1839, the Congress of the Republic of Texas divided off their land in each county to be used for public school funding. And in 1845, they were called to establish free schools throughout all of Texas. By 1854, school districts were made and state legislature put aside $2 million for the permanent school fund. And then finally, in 1876, the state took revenue from about 52 million acres of land all across Texas and divided that up based off of each district. And as well, they took occupational taxes, so what we put into our work, and poll taxes. And all of this was put into the permanent school fund, which was a pile of money that was distributed based off of where property taxes were taken from. But this funding is where the initial problem begins. Those who had the financial means and were willing to pay a higher property tax saw that reflected in their school districts. But those communities who could not support the idea of an increased property tax simply because they couldn't afford it would receive less funding for their children's education. I can see both aspects of this argument. On one hand, if you're going to work for your money, you want to see that recycled back into your own community. But for someone who was born into a low-income family, has no control over their situation, if we keep recycling into the wealthy, we're never giving these minorities an opportunity to work their way up to a higher class. So where's the equality in that? I personally feel if funding was equally distributed among the state, while taking in consideration the actual size of the school district, we would see a more level school system. While I agree with the author of the text when he correlates an inferior education to economic and political inequality, I feel that's exactly why Arthur Gotchman believed that he wanted to take on San Antonio in a fight for educational equality and equalized funding. Gotchman and the parents of Edgewood School District wanted to fight for equal resources for their children. They felt that based off of their race and the division of the district proved that those schools that had more minority populated areas received less funding than those that had wealthy counties. They found that their wealthy counties had more properties for taxation, whereas those in the poverty-stricken area did not. While initially the case was ruled in favor of Rodriguez after being brought to a 3-judge court system, it was appealed almost 2 years later. It fell into the hands of Lewis Powell, who was experienced in the education system but did not want to see it fall into the hands of the state, but rather stay within the local school boards. Because of this, Powell did not believe that unequal funding meant that education was unequal. He felt that if money was equalized, it would actually hurt low-income and minority areas. His argument against Rodriguez proved worthy in the court, and therefore Rodriguez was said to not be in violation of the 14th Amendment, and therefore the case was dropped. While I can understand Powell's logic, I honestly feel like he was only looking out for the wealthy instead of the students as a whole. I believe that there can be a way for equalized funds among the states while we still give local school boards the ability to allocate the funds properly. The state needs to take control of the money and divvy that up equally, and then the local can can give the funds where they're needed. I found myself in an emotional whirlwind. I was thrilled when the Rodriguez case was shown favor by the three-judge system, and then quickly discouraged when an appeal was made. There was no doubt in my mind that someone would appeal the ruling, of course, but I thought for sure after 2 years the ruling would stay the same. Unfortunately, the outcome was not as the readers would hope. But it did create a conversation that we desperately needed. Something is seriously wrong with the current funding distribution for our school districts. So while Rodriguez ultimately lost their case, they paved the road for so many after them. It was reported that at least 32 states have since taken school funding into their hands, and half of these cases were successful in changing their current school funding. Rodriguez made it okay for people to question their school funding and to fight for equal resources. While equal education isn't exactly where it needs to be, we are on our way towards creating an equal school system for the future, and this is all thanks to Rodriguez and those who came before them.